Rodolfo, you have a question.
Hey, yes. Hey, Z. Thanks again. Always great. It's always great talk. I had a question about Coordinate and systems like that don't require preset reward metrics, KPI systems, and let just like the contributors in smaller groups, right, distribute rewards according to perception, which it has its own potential flaws. But in the context of of your work, have you thought about that? Where does it fit?
So we talked a little bit earlier in this call about how more subjective methods work when groups are small. Part of the way that you can make this work is this concept called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is the idea that you push the decision-making authority as close to those who are impacted by it, or you might have somewhat hierarchical structures, but you are still trying to make the decision-making happen low, not high. You want as little at the top as possible, and the decision-making to happen at low levels. So if you fractal something down to the point where the group that's working is small enough, then I actually think that's great. I think it means that you are in the regime where that direct observation is valid. But going back to the point I made earlier about being able to see and value that work, the graph of peer-to-peer reputation, if you are having to evaluate work of people that you haven't worked with, it doesn't work very well. Like even with praise, it's sort of like that kind of thing where there are people calling out each other for their contributions, and it works great as long as the people who are actively participating in the praise calling out process are able to see everything and are collectively representative of all of the groups and can net balance things. But that's actually really hard because it's unlikely that it will naturally occur as a representative. The people who participate in certain types of social activities are going to be the ones who are most commonly and most actively involved, and they may have less clear perception of people who do, I don't want to call them antisocial activities, but maybe introvert activities, some of which include token engineers, people who might just spend a bunch of time on a whiteboard thinking through something, or trying to do a derivation, or fighting with the Jupyter notebook themselves, and then occasionally give an output, but maybe that's less frequent, but the amount of work per interaction is different. So It's pretty natural for any social sort of subjective community-based thing to need to happen at a very local level, small teams. And so my instinct for this is to continue to build on the sort of sociocracy concepts and make sure that we have a function segmentation concept where a large DAO that wants to make use of that kind of mechanism actually first breaks itself out over areas of work, possibly working groups for operations, working groups for communication and community management, working groups for technical development, maybe multiple working groups on different projects within technical development, et cetera, which will give you a sort of first order sort of teams or working groups or swarms, for example, in one hive, and then you'll have some sort of transversal circle where people come together to take discussions and decisions about the larger group. And then even those individual circles may have sub-works, sub-streams, smaller working groups that have more specific sets of projects. If you are able to provide sufficient again, I guess the right term is structure. You sort of identify, here's our purpose, here are the functions we need to fulfill the purpose, here are the circles or working groups fulfilling the functions. Within those functions, you now have a sort of purpose. So this concept recurses. We have functions required to fulfill our function or sub-functions. We have people taking on responsibilities. If you actually start to break down and map your organization, you can actually get to the point where I think almost all of those local regions are sufficiently small, in the sort of Scrum sense, 2 pizza teams or smaller, where people really do have good mutual visibility and they can do a more sort of subjective, direct mutual valuation. But then you get this sort of, okay, you go up a level and you say, okay, well, how do we make those same decisions? Maybe not over individuals, but over groups. You go up a level. How do we make those decisions? Maybe not over individuals, but over the constituent groups. And so this kind of fractaling is also pretty natural, but it can be tricky because it does start to impose some hierarchy if you model it that way. You can also model it less as a hierarchy and more as just a graph, where you don't treat any particular group as, you know, a subsidiary of another group, but rather just a graph of groups. But, you know, that will get you a less coordinated net entity. So I think depending on what the organization is, it might be appropriate to have something, you know, deeper or fatter or, you know, more webbed and less hierarchical. And so you can tell I like graph models, but in my head, I see these sort of power structure graphs, which represent the relations between not just individuals and groups, but groups and groups, to try to create a, you know, hopefully a, you know, not a one directional power flow, but actually a meaningful balance of powers that's appropriately matched to the functions and purposes of these organizations.
Mm-hmm.